Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I wanted to talk to you about a trade paperback that I just finished reading. This book is called Aztek the Ultimate Man. Actually, the book itself, the collection, is called JLA Presents Aztek the Ultimate Man. But this was a 10-issue ongoing series that got canceled at issue 10, and at the time it was just called Aztek the Ultimate Man. And this series was written by Grant Morrison and Mark Millar, or Mark Miller, however you want to say his name. Both of those names are pretty huge. At the time this was written, Grant Morrison was a pretty well-known name. He had been doing several projects for DC Comics, and at the time was writing Justice League of America. And Mark Millar was not as well-known then. He really came into the spotlight, if you will, when he started writing The Authority in the early 2000s. So this was still at a point when he was protéging under Grant Morrison before they kind of went their separate ways. I think the best thing I can say about this book right off the bat is that the concept is really great, the execution is less great. First of all, this was, as near as I can tell, envisioned to be an ongoing series, but it only lasted 10 issues. And this is not the same thing as it was envisioned to be 10 issues long and it wraps up everything by issue 10. In fact, in the last 2 issues of this book, there are like 3 or 4 plot lines that are introduced that, as near as I can tell, are never wrapped up again. So I'm not entirely sure if this was by design. I'm not sure if the writers were saying, hey, let's just throw in a few new plot lines that are never going to get wrapped up anywhere, or if they thought they were going to have an opportunity to do these things later on. I'm really not sure. But if you are going to go into this book expecting a full, complete story, you're probably going to be disappointed. This book does not really present you a complete story. It kind of just stops. There are a few minor plot points that don't get picked up anywhere, and then there's one major plot point that does get resolved in Grant Morrison's run on Justice League. So unfortunately, if you do want the air quotes complete story, you might have to go and pick up a few volumes of Grant Morrison's JLA run. I've already read that run, so I don't feel as disappointed reading this as someone who has not read his JLA run might feel. The thematic elements of this book really intrigued me a little bit, at least in the first half of this book. In the mid to late 90s, writers like Mark Waid and Grant Morrison, they were kind of trying to bring back the classic elements of the superhero. If you recall, Mark Waid, he wrote Kingdom Come. He also had a run on The Flash. Grant Morrison and Mark Millar, the two guys on this book, they had a brief run on The Flash. And then Grant Morrison, he was working on JLA for almost 50 issues, and then Mark Waid, he did the miniseries that led into Grant Morrison's JLA. These guys were definitely a tag team duo in the mid-90s, and they even worked together on 52 in the mid-2000s. So as far as I understand it, they are very much collaborators every now and again. So this book, it is very similar to Kingdom Come and Morrison's JLA and Waid's work on The Flash, and even some of Waid's recent work on Daredevil, where it is saying, you know what, that air quotes grim and gritty stuff, the 90s anti-hero, that is not what is cool about comic books. And they set out to try and prove that stuff like Truth, Justice, and the American Way can still be made interesting and prove to tell interesting stories in comic books. And that was kind of their modus operandi for a little while. And even now you could say that some of their works in the present day, like Waid's Daredevil or Morrison's All-Star Superman, both of those are very much operating under that premise, if you will. This series kind of is doing that too, and I would say it's probably one of the lesser known ones, because I wouldn't say even people who are very well acquainted with comic books probably don't know who Aztek the Ultimate Man is. The premise here is that Aztek is a very, air quotes, pure character. He was raised in seclusion away from society. He's the ultimate man. He himself does not have powers, but he does have this helmet that is powered by the 4th dimension, and it's got all of these nifty abilities with it. And basically, he is the ambassador of Quetzalcoatl. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that. The Aztec god of the serpent, I believe. And he is the warrior of the light. He has been sent to this city called Vanity, which is kind of a dark version of Metropolis, I guess you could say. It's very weird. If you've read Gail Simone's work on the Atom from the mid-ish 2000s. This is kind of like a bigger version of Ivy Town from that series. It's a very quirky area. It kind of draws in bad, if you will. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the Hellmouth from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They say that the architecture kind of moves around every now and then, so even people who have lived in this city their whole life, they still get confused and lost in this city. It's basically a comic book city. It's kind of cool, but there's not a whole lot that's done with it. Anyway, Vanity, this city, is a place where basically nobody has hope, and the only air quotes hero of Vanity is a guy called Blood Type, who's basically a more psychotic parody of the Punisher. And he dies in the first issue of this series, so Aztek kind of comes in to replace this guy. And even though he is doing stuff similar to a superhero, he doesn't really consider himself a superhero. His mission is to fight the Dark God. And we don't really find out a whole lot about that in this series, but that is his mission, and protecting Vanity and doing superheroic things is just kind of what he does while he's waiting to fulfill his mission. And unfortunately, we don't get to see a whole lot of that storyline developed because this series ends 10 issues in, and I can definitely see this could have gone on another 10 or 15 issues before Morrison and Millar decided to delve into those storylines. And unfortunately, Morrison did not really touch on the Dark God stuff in his JLA run. He did kind of tie up one loose end from the Aztek series in JLA, but the Dark God stuff did not ever really get resolved at all. Overall, I'm going to say this is a pretty fun book. If you are like me, I get sick and tired of seeing the dark, grim and gritty stuff in comic books. It's been popular for longer than I've been alive, and when it's done right, it's fun, it can be interesting. I really like The Dark Knight Returns and The Watchmen. Those are two really excellent stories that happen to use the grim and gritty to their advantage. But a lot of comic books try to follow in the steps of those books, and they just don't make it work at all. And this book, along with several of the others that I mentioned earlier, tries to work against that. It tries to say, you know what, grim and gritty is not the only way that you can do stories. We can do stories that are lighthearted and fun again. And this tries to do something with that. It kind of loses its way a little bit. About halfway into the book, it kind of stops working with that theme and is more about trying to connect Aztek to members of the Justice League of America. So by the final issue, it's much more about saying, look, Aztek is going to be showing up in JLA. You should go and read that title. And it's less about the classic version of a hero like Aztek versus the 90s anti-hero like Blood Type. Overall, I would say go ahead and pick this book up if you see it. But it is not perfect. There are a few flaws. It kind of loses the themes that it's working with about halfway through, like I was saying. Also, this is not a complete story. It just kind of drops off at the very end. There are several plot points that don't get picked up again. And if you don't know anything about this character, if you've never seen him before, you can see him in some of Grant Morrison's work on JLA, so that may or may not be a plus for you. If you really enjoyed this book, you might be excited to go pick up the JLA books that he appears in. And if you're like me and you don't like having to hunt down other stories to get the air quotes complete story, you might not be happy that you feel obligated or something to go and get the JLA stuff to get the story that's not collected here. I don't know. Maybe you'll feel that way, maybe you won't. Overall, like I said, I would say this is a book that is worth your time, but it is not the best thing in the world. I would say both of these writers have done better things on their own. This is better than I expected, but it's still not great. So that's about all I have to say here, guys. I hope that this review wasn't too incoherent. I hope you were able to understand everything I was trying to say. And if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with another kind of video. I will catch you guys then. Have a great day.